What's going on, everybody? Yes, this is not a film room, but we have a very special guest with us tonight. I'm starting a new series. This is called Dinner with the Enemy. As you guys know, the Chargers, the Raiders, and the Broncos, not exactly the best friends of the Kansas City Chiefs. So I have a very special guest. You guys know me, Daniel Harms, film analyst, Steve Haglund, content creator for the Chargers. He actually creates content for their social media page. It's awesome. It's so cool. He's also the host of the Guilty as Charged podcast. Happy to have him. Very, very lucky to have him on today. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here. Returning the favor here. You came on our show in the springtime a few times, including on draft weekend. So happy to come on this channel today and talk about the Chargers and the Chiefs, and should be fun.
Absolutely. Love being able to return favors and be on people's shows and things like that. It's always fun to do that. So just as an aside, how cool is it to create content for the Chargers social media team? I think that's one that we all kind of recognize as definitely at the forefront of making fun, cool animations. You know, the I forget what exactly started it, but I know that we've seen some of the crazy animations and stuff that they've done. So, man, how cool is it to be a part of that group?
Yeah, it's a ton of fun, man. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. So we had a working relationship with the team previously, mostly for like player interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, a handful of times during the season, handful of times during the off season, we would reach out to them and say, hey, can we interview Gerald Everett this week? Can we interview, Jamari Sawyer? Like, stuff like that. And then they reached out to us in the spring and were like, hey, like, can you send us your numbers, like what your downloads are, what your views are? Like, we're interested in like potentially giving you guys some more access. And we were at the time thinking like, oh, like they're going to give us like weekly player interviews, like that's going to be awesome. Sweet. Good for us. And then we met with the head of production and he was like, yeah, no, we want to take one of your episodes a week and put it on our channel. And we were like, holy shit. Like, I don't know if we can start here, but it was like, duh, like, of course, like, what do you want us? Where do we sign? And it's been a ton of fun. The second week of the relationship, we were like, hey, like, can we interview maybe somebody? And they were like, yeah, how's Tom Telesco, the general manager? And we're like, sure.
Wow.
So it's been a ton of fun, man. It's the coolest thing. Like, it's, doing this podcast we never dreamed that I would be like actually representing the Chargers.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been very fortunate that way.
That's so cool, man. I just one of these days, I know people watch the channel from the Chiefs. I know they do, but we have yet to be, reached out. So one of these times, you guys just feel free. Would love to get going with that. But that really is. It's one of the coolest things because again, I love what the Chargers social media team does, and the fact that you guys now have inside access to them recently. Your stuff's going up there. That's awesome. You guys do a great job. So again, very happy to have you on. So let's dive in because that's what this is about. This is about the Chiefs, the Chargers, probably one of the best now to date rivalries in terms of in division because Justin Herbert, who just got paid, handed the bag, absolutely deserving of it. Him and Patrick Mahomes, two of the best young quarterbacks in the NFL. We say young for Patrick. He is still under 30, but he's starting to be a seasoned veteran in the NFL.
Can he age faster? Like, can that be something that I request here?
Unfortunately, I don't think it works that way for us. I don't have access to the time machine for that. Yeah, right. I don't think we would have used it on Tom Brady a long time ago. Seriously. But it wouldn't have really mattered, right? Because it seems to 45 years old didn't make that much of a difference. So, yeah. But he just, Justin Herbert just got this gigantic contract. We love watching him play because a lot of people really talk about Herbert and the offense that they were running, about how they were never really aired the ball out a lot. But I just want you guys to understand that we saw a different Justin Herbert. We absolutely did. The things that he did against the Kansas City Chiefs are right here. He is going to throw bombs against the Kansas City Chiefs. So seeing as how he did just get paid, what steps are you expecting him to take this season as he ascends as a quarterback in the NFL?
Yeah, this particular game, people kind of have forgotten this. He gets injured in the first Chiefs game, and breaks his ribs, a fractured rib cartilage, that he dealt with for most of the season. And this game was really when we were like, okay, like Justin is back.
Yeah,
this is the ribs are about as healthy as they can be. but people kind of forget that rib injury happened so early on in the season. You know, people always talk about, Joey getting injured and Keenan getting injured and Mike getting injured. But the rib injury for Justin Herbert was the thing that he dealt with all season long. And, the thing that we always harped on our show throughout the season is that, like, everything that happened to the Chargers offense last year just made space so much tighter and tighter and tighter. You lose Rashawn Slater. The right tackle, Trey Pipkins, was in and out of the lineup with an MCL sprain.
Mm-hmm.
Keenan's in and out. Mike's in and out. Justin's injured. So everything gets smaller and smaller. They're blocking tight end, missed basically the whole season.
Yeah.
So it's everything shrunk for the Chargers. And what ultimately ended up happening is that Justin would, people like to highlight him as like this processor, right? Who can go 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe back to 1. What happened really last season is he would look at the first read. If the first read wasn't there, he would immediately go to Austin Eckler as number 4. And it was like, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, it was like 1, 2, 3, 4. Like, it was just like immediately to Austin Eckler. That's why Austin Eckler caught 107 passes last year.
Yeah.
So the whole point of the offseason right now is all about like creating more space for the receivers and for Justin. And I'm not going to lie, I was pretty skeptical of how that was really going to look, because Kellen Moore and Joe Lombardi, like they share some DNA. Kellen Moore was the backup quarterback, I should say, in Detroit when Joe Lombardi was the play caller there. Mike McCarthy and Sean Payton share some DNA. So like there's some connected tissue here. But when I was down there at training camp this past Saturday, it's all vertical stuff, man. Like, they maybe threw like a couple screens in here and there, but it was all like 15-yard dig route here to Mike Williams or Quentin Johnston. Let's throw a corner to Keenan Allen. Let's throw a post to Mike Williams. Like, let's throw go balls to John Hightower, this former Eagle who's kind of making some plays. So it's a drastically different offense than what people will have seen this past year, when Joe Lombardi was so shrunken down to the bare bones of the offense. And I think people will be surprised to see how different it's going to look under Kellen Moore.
It's interesting that you bring up the verticality, because I think that points directly to the difference between Dak Prescott and Justin Herbert. Dak Prescott's a very good mental quarterback. I think that one of the things you can do with Dak is you can pretty much construct any offense you want around him, and he can operate it. He can get through his reads. He can operate inside the pocket. And now that he's not necessarily the mover that he used to be, they're not using him in that regard. Like, Kellen Moore was using him much more in the run game, the quarterback run game earlier in his tenure there. That tended to go away with the injuries. I'm interested to see how that shifts here, because I think Justin Herbert can be used in the quarterback run game because he's a very athletic quarterback. If they're going to be creating more space vertically downfield, as we've seen in Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes and the way they did that, there's so much space to take off. So I'm interested to see how that's going to go. And that kind of, just kind of answered my second question. Some of the things you're excited to see with Kellen Moore now. I'll bring this up because I was expecting them to go speed at receiver instead of Quentin Johnston, he's not like slow, but he's not necessarily a field stretcher as we all were expecting the Chargers to go, especially with Keenan Allen still there, Mike Williams still there. You still have Josh Palmer, who's in the same speed realm as I would say Quentin Johnston is. So when you think about what they're going to end up doing offensively, you don't necessarily have that burner type. Is there anything that you've been seeing at camp or that you expect Kellen Moore to do with the weapons that they have that are still going to allow them to stretch the field?
Yeah, so there's two key things there that I think we're seeing so far. The first is Mike Williams is basically taking about 35-40% of his snaps at training camp in the slot. That's a drastic change. It's a drastic change. Under Joe Lombardi, it was about 15%. Like, it was very rarely that they would put Mike Williams in the slot. It was always like, you're next. You're going to run go balls. You're going to run posts, corners, slants, and that's your game. And this year with the slot usage, like, it's a lot of they've used him on mesh concepts. They've used him on jet sweeps. They've used him in a variety of different ways that we did not really see under Joe Lombardi. So that's the first thing. I think if you're a fantasy guy, and I know you are, that's going to make Mike Williams a much more stable presence. And I think for the Chargers too, like, that was always the thing, is that like, he'll go one game where he'll go 8 for 140 and 2 touchdowns. And the next game, it was like 3 for 33. Like, that was a very frequent Mike Williams thing under Joe Lombardi. And I think this usage in the slot is really going to elevate his play. The second thing with Quentin Johnston that you bring up, I agree he's not fast in terms of like running like a 4.4 verticality guy, but his acceleration in the short term is such a treat to watch in person. And that's just a thing that the Chargers did not have. That's not Mike Williams' game. That's not Keenan Allen's game. That's not Jalen Guyton's game. It's not Joshua Palmer's game. And so they're giving Quentin Johnston all of these yards after catch opportunities on benders, crossers, drag routes, slants. And he's just able to get upfield in a hurry. Yeah, he might not necessarily have that like top gear to like house those plays, but he can turn a 5-yard gain into a 20-yard gain. And that's an extremely useful tool that the Chargers were missing last year. So, you know, it's a whole lot of fun right now. There's a lot of hype about the Chargers offense and the way that Kellen Moore is using these guys. You know, John Hightower, who I mentioned earlier, he's kind of being that speed threat that they haven't really had. So we'll see what happens there. He's a guy who struggled with drops in Philadelphia. They had him on the practice squad all last season, and they never really bothered activating him. But he's a guy that's been a big surprise in training camp so far, just because of his speed.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. The way, especially with the way defenses are currently using a ton of, you know, the off coverages, whether it's too high or using cover 3, kind of back pressing, extending the middle of the field with Quentin Johnston makes a lot of sense. I assumed he was going to be used kind of like CeeDee Lamb in Dallas with the yards after catch stuff. It makes a whole lot of sense because they have that gift to themselves. I think that, you know, CD just offers more from the outside perspective, being able to win vertically with his speed. So that all tracks for me. I think that's something that Chiefs fans will be unfortunately sad to hear, because we've watched this offense kind of exploit the Chiefs defense for the last couple of seasons under Justin Herbert. So having another weapon that can take advantage of the middle of the field, where the Chiefs typically are a little more, I guess you could say, apt to be taken advantage of at the linebacker core. Now that Drew Tranquil's there, used to be a Charger, maybe things changed just a little bit in some of those regards. But that's one guy we didn't talk about was Keenan Allen, and the expectations for the wide receiver group. You talked about Mike Williams, you talked about, you know, Quentin Johnston. For me, as not only as a fantasy guy, but a guy who just loves watching football, Keenan Allen still has it. He still can win at every level of the field. Not so much down the field as much. It's not his game, but he can win in that short to intermediate area. Now, still, when you have all these weapons around him, is he going to still be that go-to guy? We saw last year when he came back healthy down the stretch, he was just a target machine. He was consistently getting all those targets. Do you expect that to stay the same in this offense going forward?
Yeah, I think if you look at Keenan Allen's, you know, last 8 games of last season, he was producing like a top 5 receiver. He really was. Yeah. And I don't think he's actually a top 5 receiver. There's so many great receivers in the NFL right now. But from a volume perspective, that's what he was doing. And the slot usage for Mike Williams is making me doubt a little bit of that kind of high floor for Keenan Allen.
Okay.
I think from a physical standpoint, like, he still looks as spry, as efficient as he ever has, you know, so far in training camp. He's got a great relationship with Justin Herbert. There's so much trust there. And that aspect of things is different with Keenan than even with Mike Williams, who Justin Herbert definitely trusts Mike Williams. But there's just like this element of like, okay, I know Keenan's really going to be open here, even though right now he's maybe not open. Like, there's just that extra level of trust between Herbert and Keenan Allen that it doesn't really exist with the other guys. So I still expect Keenan to lead the team in targets, lead the team in receptions, lead the team in third down conversions. Like, there's just that other mental gear that those two can get to, especially in those money situations. But, you know, if Mike Williams ends up having, you know, 200-300 more yards receiving and 4 or 5 more touchdowns, I wouldn't be surprised by that. But I still expect Keenan Allen to get around 100 receptions, around 1,000 yards, just because that's who he's always been, and Justin still loves throwing to him.
Yeah, the passing attack is still going to be something to watch in LA. There's not much really changing there from that perspective. I do think it's going to be more explosive, which is going to be fun to watch. I think that they're going to be a team to watch regardless. They always are, because Justin Herbert brings eyes. He's just one of the more pleasing quarterbacks to watch throw a football. Like, it just explodes off his arms. So I love watching that. over to the run game a little bit. Last season was a very, very weird year for the Chargers run game. You can almost 100% directly correlate that to Rashawn Slater not being there. They had a full 2 yards fewer per carry running to the outside left last year than they did in 2021. That's literally a direct correlation to not having your best offensive tackle and offensive lineman on the field. So when you consider hopefully being able to make defenses fear the passing attack, you have Rashawn Slater back. Is this going to be like the last hurrah for Austin Eckler in LA? And are they going to use him more on first down? Because I think that last year they didn't do it as much. If I recall correctly, they were like 8th in EPA per play on first down in 2021, and they were nearly at the bottom of the league last year in EPA and first down. So is that going to see? Are we going to see Austin Eckler be more involved on first down? And maybe is this going to be the last time that we see him in a Chargers uniform?
So Chargers run game first. Rashawn Slater being out was definitely a big issue. The thing there is that they didn't really have a left tackle situation that they felt comfortable with behind him. They had this training camp battle between Trey Pipkins, who eventually won it, and Storm Norton, who was the right tackle the previous year after Brian Bulaga got injured, basically in the first quarter of the first game, which is classic Brian Bulaga. So they didn't have this situation that they felt great with. In the game that Rashawn Slater got injured, Storm Norton came in at left tackle. This is the game right after Justin Herbert breaks his ribs. And Storm Norton, in basically 30 snaps ish, I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but it wasn't a ton. It wasn't like a tiny amount either. In 30 snaps, he allowed like 11 pressures and 4 quarterback hits. It was like the worst left tackle performance I've ever seen. And so that was kind of it. Like they were like, we're done with Storm Norton. So they put Jamari Sawyer, this interior offensive line prospect who's playing guard for them now, drafted him as a guard. They put him at left tackle because that's what he played at Georgia. Yeah. And the two body types could not be more different. Jamari Sawyer is like this typical SEC guard body, just huge and kind of slow, honestly. Like he's a different kind of athlete. And Rashawn Slater is like a 9.8 RAS. Like he's an elite athlete at the position. Yeah. So that changed things so dramatically. And then also Frank Smith left to Miami to be the offensive coordinator, and he was the Chargers run game coordinator in 2021. And so that was a very underrated loss that the Chargers did not replace. They just kind of figured, the Frank installed everything, like we'll just kind of keep humming. And then Rashawn got hurt. So they had to basically scrap the whole run game plan and were never really able to like find their way. So that's what happened in 2022 with the run game. It wasn't really on Austin Eckler's fault because he was still pretty productive. Like he still had some productive moments, but there was no clear identity, and it just kind of was a big issue. But in terms of Austin Eckler, they don't have the money to pay him what he is going to think he's worth next year.
Yeah.
And the Chargers right now, before the Justin Herbert extension, they were $60 million in red, $60 million over the cap for 2024. That's down now. The way that they structured the contract, they relieved about $10 million, but that's still $50 million. And this is a team that basically pushed their chips as far into 2023 as they possibly could have, restructuring Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams, all 4 of them. So all 4 of them are scheduled to have like $35 million cap hits next year. And you're going to have to cut or trade at least 2 of them to just get to a manageable cap standpoint to be able to draft and sign that draft class, let alone like re-sign Austin Eckler, re-sign Michael Davis, who's their best corner right now, re-sign Gerald Everett is a free agent after the season, be able to sign free agents. So there's just no way that they're going to be able to afford Austin Eckler and be able to pay him what he wants. If he's able to concede and say, hey, I'll take a Jamal Williams kind of $4 million contract, then sure. But he's going to want to push the market because he's been very vocal about the running back market and making sure that he gets what he's worth. Like that's the reality. And that's great. I'm more power to him, but the Chargers will not be able to afford him. There's just no way.
So there's reason to believe that the Chargers might look drastically different next year, considering the money situation they're in. It's almost as if they're like, we got one shot with this roster. That's right now,
pretty much,
and we're going to go for it.
pretty
So
much.
Chiefs fans, just be lookout. They're going to be coming out for blood this year because they really don't have another choice. They have all this money situation. So that's unfortunate because I love watching Austin Eckler. I think he's a perfect fit in exactly where you want him. He's got that comfort with Justin Herbert. He has a really good he's a good runner. I think that inside the tackles, you'd like to see just a little bit more out of him. But at the end of the day, he's catching 100 balls. I don't necessarily care too much about that. He's a very good outside runner. So the getting back to that this year, I think is going to really help their offense, especially keeping on pace on first down. Go back to the game against the playoff game against the Jaguars. They could not run the ball in the second half. And then everything just stormed downhill for them. They should have won that game, as you know, very easily. Didn't end up working out that way. So, offense, I think, is in a good situation this year. Next year, we'll kind of have to revisit and see what it looks like undergoing some issues and some changes going forward with that contract and other contracts. So,
just really quickly, they have a really nice young core of players. Like it's not like the Chargers are going to be dead in the water next year after they have to make these decisions. You know, obviously Justin Herbert's under contract, or when James is under contract, they'll have one of Joey or Khalil. They just drafted Tuli Tuipulotu in the second round. They have Quentin Johnston to replace whatever receiver they decide to move on from. So they've been proactive in kind of planning for this. And I think, like, if you look at the cap sheet, like every player who is like on the second contract is coming off of the books by the time they have to like really pay Justin Herbert his big money deal. So they have set themselves up for an all-in season right now, but at the same time, like, they have some long-term flexibility too after next season. So next season might be like a little dicey, but they have some young pieces that could really, you know, come in and make some strong impacts over the next 2 years and be fine.
Yeah, they're in a good spot, especially in the offensive line with Rashawn Slater, Zion Johnson, and Jamie Sawyer all being drafted in the last 2 years.
Yep.
Those are going to be really good players going forward for a long time. 2 first-round draft picks. You know, Sawyer was a 6th-round draft pick, so people didn't expect him to do as well as he did at tackle, specifically because you said he was slow. I didn't expect his footwork to be as good. And just when you have that, like, it's almost like being a rock at left tackle. He basically was a rock. You couldn't move him. So if he got out there, you weren't getting by him. Like, you just weren't doing it. So it was really awesome to watch that body type. Like you said, he's a prototypical guard coming out of the SEC, be a really successful tackle. You have that option now because the Chargers get hurt quite a lot. It's a very nice situation to be in where you have Sawyer who can play right, you know, can play guard, you can play tackle. So they've got some, like, quite a few rookies and undrafted free agents from this specific draft class. And like looking at the roster is just full of it. So like I said, it might take maybe a year to get into that spot after next, but they're setting themselves up, I think, hitting some draft picks as well. And some of those draft picks I'm excited to watch, especially from this past draft class. And we're going to talk about their defense right over here because like I said, we talked about health. It's seemingly one of the biggest consistent problems for the Chargers, whether it's San Diego or LA, it doesn't matter. I am not a doctor. I'm not going to speak to it. All I know is something is in the water and with the Chargers, wherever they go. I feel for you guys. It's terrible to consistently have injuries like that. I mean, look at the Broncos today. Tim Patrick just suffered another season-ending injury in training camp. This stuff is ridiculous. So Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, this is going to be one of the pivotal points of the defense being really successful this year. Getting after the quarterback, as it always is, especially in Patrick Mahomes' division. We can't really say it's not. 7 straight years tells you it's his division. So are they going to be able to stay healthy, cause havoc this year? Is Khalil Mack going to get back to the pass rusher, honestly, and the run defender that he has been in the past? I think he's took steps back in both regards last year, whether it was health or just not having more attention on him because Joey Bosa missed some games last year. I think Bosa is a top 6 defensive end in the NFL when he's healthy. So I'm all ears, man. Are they going to be able to do it this year?
So there's a really weird thing with Joey Bosa where, like, he alternates years with like the injury thing. Like, if you look at his, Pro Reference sheet, it's like basically an odd year is a year that Joey Bosa will stay healthy. 2021, the only game he missed was because of COVID. In 2019, he played every game. 2017, his second year in the league, he played every game. Like it's the weirdest thing, but so yeah, I expect Joey Bosa to stay healthy this year. He's he had this core muscle surgery that he said had been plaguing him for like multiple years. And Jay Rogers, or not Jay Rogers, excuse me, Giff Smith, their outside linebackers coach, was quoted early in the offseason that Joey, this injury that derailed him this last year, that was reported as like a groin tear, both of his groin muscles came off of the bone, according to Giff Smith, right? Which sounds like the most painful thing ever for any man. So he had the surgery, and there was not really a ton reported about the injury or the surgery. Initially it was like, yeah, it'll be like 6 to 8 weeks from Ian Rappaport and all those guys. And then like 8 weeks came around. And it was like, yeah, Joey's still like a ways away from like returning to football. And eventually he was able to come back and contribute, about 25 snaps the last few games of the season. And he was still pretty productive in those games from a per play basis. But long answer there to say that I do expect Joey to stay healthy. Khalil never really has had an injury problem. I mean, it was really like the 1 foot injury.
Yeah.
Outside of that, he's been very, very durable. Last season, I think, was more about the Chargers' deficiencies outside of Khalil Mack in terms of like lack of pressure. I still think he was, a pretty productive player on a per play basis. And then teams kind of figured out like, opposite of Khalil Mack is Kyle Van Noy, who's not really an edge rusher. He's more of like an inside linebacker playing edge rusher. And so the edge rusher spot opposite of Khalil was a big time issue for them. So now that Joey's healthy, they drafted Tui Tuipulotu, who I'm sure we'll talk about. Their edge depth is in a much better spot this year. And if one of those guys happen to miss time, like I think they'll be manageable in that regard. But I guess we'll see what happens. But I expect at minimum Khalil will stay healthy, because I think that's a proven track record we have, that unless like a freak injury happens, like he'll be on the field.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to say that he doesn't. I was just trying to say the combination of the
two
be able to cause some havoc. So yeah, he's always on the field, just always there. So he's getting a little bit up there. Unfortunately, if you're one of the best defensive ends in the last decade plus, Khalil Mack is getting up there. But the depth there, like you said, I was a little surprised that they drafted Tuli that high. I didn't have a day 2 grade on Tuli. I got like 2.5 games of him, so I may have just missed the train on Tuli. That could have been on my access that I had to film.
His tape at USC was a little frustrating, not in the sense that like he wasn't productive, but like one of the games that I watched was their Stanford game, and he played as like a nose tackle for like 40 snaps in that game. And like he's not a nose tackle type. He weighs like 260 pounds. Like I don't know what the heck USC was doing last year. So I think he is somebody that was a little bit undervalued. He was injured through the draft process, so he didn't get to like test or anything of that and like answer that kind of questions. But he looks very lean in person in compared to like what you see on USC tape, which has been good to see. Both Khalil and Joey have talked about him being basically like this sponge, and like he's just attached to their hip, just like asking them all these questions so far in training camp. So I think Tuli will be productive. I mean, there's that adjustment period, right, for edge rushers in the NFL, but I think the Chargers are very excited about Tuli.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I think that you got the raw tools there. I think that's one thing that I noticed, especially if he's gonna be leaned down, getting explosive, that first step explosiveness for those guys in the NFL, especially the rookies. It's really important to be able to make tackles respect that you can attack the edge. You can actually get up there, so you can build your pass rush off of that. So I'll be excited to watch them. I'm always excited to watch young players wherever they are, especially because we're draft guys. That's what we do. We love to cover the draft too. So I love watching everybody anywhere. So I'm looking at the interior defensive line for the Chargers. It's not looking too great. There's not a lot of like guys that I'm really excited about that I think could really help them, and especially when we look at the run game, defending the run. That is something that Staley has been outspoken about, that he not doesn't necessarily care. He wants to stop the explosive plays, and who cares if we get 4 yards or 5 yards if we can stop those explosive plays. Well, unfortunately, they're running for like 6-7 yards against the defense last year.
Yeah.
Like, just looking at the two Chiefs games, the first game, the Chiefs only ran for 93 yards on the ground. They had much tougher spot. Yeah, I mean, when
that's
the
still a lot,
of the
though.
NFL is like 128 yards a game, yeah, I think it was a much better. But then you go to the week 11 and they ran for 163. That's something that I expect, especially considering the Chiefs now have two more, we're going to put quotes around this, more athletic tackles. We don't know if they're going to necessarily be better in the run game, but I expect them to get back to their zone roots with Andy Reid, who loves to run zone, and be more maybe inside zone based off the running backs that they have. Outside zone right now in the NFL is kind of being played against really hard. Linebackers, safeties are really attacking the edge and really forcing those running backs back inside. So I think that Andy Reid is probably going to counter, especially with Isaiah Pacheco, who, as much as, yes, you want to get him to the edge, getting upfield anywhere into space is where you want him.
Yeah.
So the quicker he can get up there, I think it makes a lot of sense. But in the interior of the defensive line for the Chargers is something that I'm looking at. Like I said, I'm a little worried about pass rush and holding up against the run. So do you think that they're going to take more of an effort this season on the defensive side to say, hey, we gotta try to maximize the ability here. If we want to stop those big plays, we have to force the offense to, one, have to worry about throwing them down the field and get after the run a little bit more. Do you think they're going to do that this year?
Yeah, Brandon Staley has talked about the explosive runs being a big problem for them recently. And I think he's very cognizant of, like, the overall philosophy is, yes, like we're okay giving up like 4 or 5 yard runs every once in a while. But like last year you mentioned, it was bad and it was explosive. The thing there, though, is it was always like to the edge. Like they could not set the edge more so than like teams were going up the middle against them. Personnel wise, I think if the Chargers interior defensive line room is healthy, then I think they're like at best solid. Like Sebastian Joseph Day, Austin Johnson, Morgan Fox, and Otito Ogbonia are, in terms of like the four of them, those are their main four guys.
Yeah.
And I think that's at best solid group. The problem is that Austin Johnson and Otito Ogbonia both suffered, gruesome knee injuries to end their seasons this past year. And Otito was a rookie out of UCLA that was really starting to flash as like a true nose tackle type. And so, his rookie season was over with. So if those two guys can come back healthy by week 1, then I think the Chargers feel at least comfortable with their interior defensive line room. They drafted Scott Matlock out of Boise State as kind of a Morgan Fox long-term replacement type. So he's more of like a 4-tech, 5-tech than like a true like run stuffer. They got Gerard Clark out of Coastal Carolina, who a lot of Chargers fans like. They got as an undrafted free agent, I should say. Last year they got Christopher Hinton, an undrafted free agent from Michigan, who they're particularly high on as well. So they've got a lot of question marks in this room, but if healthy, then I think they feel good about their main four. And in terms of pass rushers, like it needs some work, but Morgan Fox was quietly like an elite pass rusher on a per play basis last year. He was top 10 in win rates and in the PRP formula as well. So he's kind of their only interior pass rusher. So if he goes down, then you're probably cranking up that blitz rate a little bit more. But it just all hinges on like if Austin Johnson and Otito can come back healthy. If not, then it's 2020 levels bad where teams are going right at Jerry Tillery and stuff like that. So we'll see what happens. Austin Johnson has been progressing more so than Otito, but we'll see.
Yeah, unfortunately, the we'll see part for that is what it comes down to. It's tough to go through some OTAs. You're trying to cover a team, and you're just like, well, if these two guys come off the PUP list, like we'll be solid. And unfortunately, that's not always how it works. And we've seen injuries kind of just derail teams. And again, I like watching these games against the Chargers and the Chiefs. They're one of the more fun, I think, not just atmosphere, but talent. And you really see that edge to want to win from both teams. Like they're close. They go down to the wire almost every time. Like just last year, the last game, it was almost a walk-off touchdown to Travis Kelce. Like that kind of stuff. They're fun. They're just really, really fun to watch. I know Chiefs fans get stressed about having to play. I would imagine Chargers fans do against the close games. Like all that stuff is at the end. When you look back, they're just a lot of fun. And someone that I'm really excited to watch is Dan Henley, out of originally Utah State, but he played at Washington State last year. Converted safety who's going to play linebacker for the Chargers this season. You know, looking at the draft of Kenneth Murray has not really worked out for the Chargers at linebacker. He was never a run defender coming out of college, and the passing down work he was supposed to bring hasn't been up to par either. He's been more of a liability against tight ends. Kind of anybody he's being asked to go up against. So I'm going to come back to the cornerback question because it makes more sense to go chronologically. So the linebackers, you know, Drew Tranquill's not there anymore. He's in Kansas City now, which is an interesting dynamic in and of itself. Yeah. Do you think that this linebacker group right now, as it stands, is good enough group to be able to, I think, eventually pass off the role to Henley, because I would imagine he's drafted to replace Kenneth Murray eventually. He was a first-round draft pick, but I don't know much about his. I haven't seen like his fourth or fifth-year option, if that's going to be picked up. Probably not after this year, but if memory serves, this would be the last year on that contract, correct?
Yeah, so they did not pick up his fifth-year option, and wouldn't have made any sense because it would have paid him like $17 million or whatever.
Okay.
And he's been very inconsistent. Like I think the Chargers have to be very cognizant of like scheming him up opportunities to make an impact. Like he's very much a high and low confidence player. And like if you go back and you watch like the 49ers game where Otito Ogbonnia got injured and like the Chargers were playing with like two defensive tackles, that was one of Kenneth Murray's best games because they were like designing run blitzes for him. They were putting him on the edge a little bit to rush the passer. You know, he's like best case scenario for Kenneth Murray is like he's like a poor man's Devin White. Like you have to basically treat him as a blitzer and blitz a lot. Otherwise, like if you're going to put him on an island against the run, on against tight ends and pass coverage, like he's going to get in a bad headspace and just like not be an effective player. So that's not a great position to be in, but like weirdly, I think like the three linebackers can complement each other pretty well. You know, Dan can come in on sub packages and cover those tight ends. You know, he can line up against running backs and like be that pass coverage player. And then Eric Kendricks is your, you know, kind of your overall like key starter. But we've seen this story a bunch with the Chargers, man. Like they sign an old player, they let a young player walk, the old player gets injured, and then that position group is just kind of shit, you know? And like Eric Kendricks has been mostly a very healthy player, but if he gets injured in like week 2 and he misses like 6 games and you're starting Kenneth Murray and Deion Henley, that's a really dicey spot to be in. And the linebacker room under Brandon Staley has been really, really weird from a personnel standpoint. You know, in 2021, they had Kaiser White and Drew Tranquill next to each other. They're both playing like really, really well. And then like randomly they benched Kaiser White for Kenneth Murray. And it just was like kind of a train wreck. And then they went back to Kaiser White. Then they benched Drew Tranquill in favor of Kenneth Murray. And that didn't go too well. They let Kaiser White walk in free agency. And then it was Tranquill and Murray. And that was okay-ish. And then they let Drew Tranquill walk for Eric Kendricks. And it's like, well, like where's the continuity at with this position group, you know? And it's just been kind of frustrating to watch. So I think people are excited about Eric Kendricks. They're excited about Deion Henley. And I think the three of them, if they can stay healthy, they can complement each other's games pretty well. But, you know, if Kenneth Murray misses time, you're asking Deion Henley to be a 3-down player. I don't know if he's ready for that yet. If Eric Kendricks misses time, again, I don't know if you know, what that kind of duo is like. And it's like, you have all these questions at defensive tackle. It would be great to have some like quality, trustworthy linebacker play, and they just don't have that. So, you know, you mentioned the trends of offense, right? Like a lot of teams are going to be coming out with like inside zone runs and power and all this stuff. And like, that's a big concern for the Chargers this year.
Yeah, I think linebacker is one of the places continuity is almost key.
It's huge
because you have to be able to consistently read your keys as a linebacker. Be able to read. Okay, is this going to be a run? Is it a fake? How am I going to be triggering? If I trigger downhill too fast, Kenneth Murray, is there going to be a big giant gap? Is there going to be a big giant gap behind me for them to throw behind? All of these things you have to be able to communicate within a second. Yes, it'd be fantastic to have defensive tackles in front of you that can hold your linebackers up. To be able to do that, it'd be great. Unfortunately, like we talked about, you don't necessarily have a true defensive line, at least interior, that's going to keep your linebackers clean. Right. So being able to shed those blocks, I think Kendricks is going to be able to shed blocks. I don't believe that Kenneth Murray can consistently shed blocks. That's been one of the big issues too, is that he triggers, and then when he gets caught up, I've seen this on a lot of linebackers that are a little bit too light. Maybe they're more pass coverage. They kind of get caught in the wash. And yeah, Henley's going to be more about that as well early on. I think that he showed some ability to get off of blocks at Washington State. Pac-12 though. We gotta wait and see him do it now. Here. I'm not trying to I am. I'm trying to say it. I don't necessarily think that the Pac-12 level of competition. We see it all the time. So it's tough. I think he'll get there. I think Kendricks is a good place to really lead that group. Continuity aside, talent is there. We'll kind of see, because behind Kendricks, you got like Nick Niemann, who, if I'm not mistaken, was he played at Iowa. Didn't he play at Iowa as like an almost
he's basically been like
pick.
6th-round pick. He's basically been like special teams only for them.
Okay.
They have Amen Ogbongbemiga, who was from Oklahoma State.
He was my next guy. I wasn't going to take a shot at the name.
That's the name. Yeah. He's played some reps here and there for them. He started like 3 or 4 games last year, 2 or 3 games the year before that. But same kind of thing. Like he's a special teamer for them. So it's going to be this trio, and if multiple guys go down, they'll get to Nick Niemann and Amen. But it's going to be that trio, and they're going to be patient with Henley too. Like they have shown that they are not going to rush like their day 2, day 3 draft picks. If they're not ready, then they'll make a pivot. So Henley's been working like exclusively with the second team defense so far. Like that's the other thing that's been really interesting, is that they're not even like making this a competition with Kenneth Murray. Like he is the starter, and Henley right now is purely a backup. So we'll see what happens there. I expect that they're going to get to a point where like run defense is still a problem. Defense is not like living up to its potential. Like they're going to look at some changes like halfway through the season. And that's when I expect a guy like Henley to really start to get more meaningful reps, because I want Kenneth Murray to do well, obviously, but I'm very skeptical that actually happens.
Yeah. So let's get to the last question, and probably the second most talented group on the defense, if not the most talented group. I think you can make a case for defensive end or outside linebacker or the secondary. But there's a lot to like in the secondary for the Chargers. Obviously, Derwin James. Derwin James is a fantastic football player, and we get to see him twice a year. I love watching him play. The matchups between him and Travis Kelce are always fun to watch, and going back and forth, seeing them win this game or that one win the other game, like that's such a fun thing to watch. There's, I'm a big Asante Samuel fan if it's just in coverage. Like if he has a tackle, we all know that's a problem. We know that's not the best thing in the world.
The Chargers know that's a problem too, by the way.
Yeah. My daughter's just coming. You guys know my daughter always comes in and says, "You can say hi." Okay. I'll be out in a little bit. Okay. Yeah. So Asante Samuel, when he's not tackling anybody, is a fantastic player. Great in coverage. I'm interested to see how they're going to use him in the corner spot in terms of slot or outside. I think he still can play either, but there's a lot of talent. I like JT Woods myself, coming out of, believe it was Oregon, if I'm not mistaken. Baylor. Okay, yeah, I get the greens confused sometimes. J.C. Jackson was a guy that we all expected, I think, to play a little bit of a bigger role, and then he got injured and he wasn't very good. But like you said, Michael Davis has been their best corner, their best corner player. So there's a lot to like on in the secondary right now for the Chargers. How is this going to play out? Is this going to be their best group? And considering the guys that they have, are you expecting them to play a little bit more man coverage this year? I think that's probably the best tool for that secondary when you look on paper. Maybe I'm wrong looking at interior, but I look at the guys on paper. I think that they're better in terms of man coverage, and we saw more zone last year. Some of the miscommunications with that as well. So, is that what you expect going forward?
Yeah, they were pretty high. They ranked pretty high in man coverage rates, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of usage. But
maybe I'm just making it. Maybe you looked at it wrong. It's possible.
In terms of JC Jackson, like, so his situation last year was really, really strange. If you look back at like training camp reports last year, like JC Jackson was the best player on the field, including Derwin James, including Justin Herbert. Like JC Jackson was getting all kinds of love from the beat reporters, from myself, from my co-host. And then he had like this random ankle injury that just kind of like popped up after they practiced against the Cowboys, and turned out that he needed surgery. He missed week 1. He came back in week 2 against the Chiefs. He missed week 3. He missed week 4. Then he came back and he was bad. And then he ruptured his patella tendon. Like that was the season for JC Jackson. And nobody was really kind of expecting him to be a super meaningful contributor this season. You know, there's so much data now on ruptured patella tendons and like what it does to your career. But he's been out there. He was a full participant today in their first padded practice. The first day of training camp, he was out there. They've kind of given him alternating days, but the first day of practice, he had a pass breakup against Keenan Allen. He had an interception against Mike Williams. Like, he's been out there and he's been playing well. So it's going to give them a lot of flexibility. The downside is that it's kind of pushing Asante Samuel Jr. into the slot. Yeah. Which, like, from a coverage standpoint, you know, he's been covering a lot of the tight ends more often, you know, working the flats more often, which I think is a strength of his. But that's also going to put him in a bind in the run game. Like, he's going to have to figure out how to tackle, and that's just not his game right now. So last year they drafted Jasir Taylor out of Wake Forest. He's kind of a bigger slot guy. So him and Asante are battling the slot out right now. And, you know, down the stretch of the season, they would put Jasir Taylor in there and take Asante Samuel out for run defense purposes. So Chargers fans are not happy about this, the possibility of Asante being in kind of a reserve role. But the reality is that he doesn't like to tackle. He won't do it. You know, he had 1 run stop last season, and he had like 7 tackles in run defense. Like, he will not play the run. It's just not what he does. It's not what his dad did. His dad didn't play the run either. So we'll see what happens. I think you feel great about the depth if you can kind of specialize Asante and come in against this team who plays a lot of 11 personnel, passes a lot, and then the next week when you play the Titans, like, you're not playing a whole lot. But then that also kind of a smart team is going to go up against the Chargers and say, let's get into heavy personnel. Let's isolate Jasir Taylor, or, you know, like, let's get into 11 personnel like Cooper Kupp. We have a big slot receiver who can block, and let's run right at Asante Samuel Jr. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that unfolds. But in terms of like talent, in terms of explosive play potential, like, you feel great about this Chargers cornerback room going forward. And then obviously you talk about Derwin James kind of being that Swiss Army knife. So the Chargers secondary should be a lot of fun, but it's going to be very interesting to see what Brandon Staley does with Asante Samuel Jr.
Yeah, finding the happy medium of using all these players. I think now more than ever, we're actually seeing that right now in Kansas City with them drafting a bunch of corners and trying to figure out how to use all of them and when to use them. We just unfortunately witnessed another one of the corners that was drafted last year go down on Najee Johnson. Going to be done for the season, who was making, you know, splashes in training camp. So having depth at the cornerback position anywhere is going to be really, really important, and being able to use different packages for different games, things going to be even more common, trying to figure out teams' strengths and, you know, rush them in and rush them out if you can. So I love, like I said, the depth there for the Chargers on the back end is going to be a lot of fun to watch. This now chess match between the Chargers and the Chiefs is continuing to get more interesting. This year is going to be that year that the Chargers are going out for it, you guys. That's what this is about. This is trying to see how this team's constructed, because you win a division 7 times in a row, teams are getting fed up. Guys are getting fed up.
Fans too.
You know, fans are getting fed up. Everyone's just like, we got to find a way to stop it. Thank you very much, Steven. I appreciate you joining me tonight. And what I want everyone to do right now, I know it's the Chargers. I understand that you might think that this is gross, but these guys over at the Guilty as Charged podcast, they do a fantastic job and continuously put out great content. I was with them during draft season. They know what they're talking about. This entire conversation should tell you that at least Steven knows what he's talking about. So give their stuff a listen. They're fantastic. They're doing stuff for the Chargers. That is very cool. It's very cool. So if you could possibly support them, I know that again, it's the Chargers. It's not what you want to do, but we appreciate our guests here, and he's done a fantastic job. So I appreciate you being here. This has been a lot of fun for me to get your information, your side on the Chargers. And I'm hopeful that you all learned something from this conversation, because that's what this is all about. It's about you guys learning. That's what this channel is about, for you guys to learn through film, through our opinions, and having intelligent guests on. So I hope you guys, again, enjoyed it. This is Wednesday. We'll have more content for you guys throughout the week and into the week. The season's almost here. First preseason game is tomorrow, the Thursday, when this is released on Wednesday. This is crazy. Insane. I'm excited. I hope you guys are looking forward to it. Have a great day. We'll see you guys next time.